Hello and welcome to Messing About with Models. Today I think it's time for an update on my new micro layout in a box, Loch Doune. As you can see, I've laid the track and I've got point motors working as well. Laying the track wasn't too difficult. There's only 3 points and a few sections of flexible track to go between them. I used the Pico rail joiners with soldered wire droppers to feed power to the track, and they've worked really well. However, it was when I came to the fitting the point motors that I had quite a bit of trouble. Because I'm using electrofrog points so that I can get smoother running at slow speeds, I needed some way of changing the polarity of the electricity in the frog. That meant I needed to go down the route of point motors with switches. Especially for the three-way switch. Ordinary left and right hand switches from the Pico range can change the frog polarity by just the switch blades in the same way that normal Hornby points work. So you don't actually need to do anything with those, although it can be more reliable to have a separate switch, just in case the contact between the switch blades and the main rails isn't good enough. So I looked at a variety of point motors and switches and felt that the SEEP PM1 motor from GaugeMaster was probably the best solution, because it had a built-in switch capability. With other motors, switch capability wasn't there, or you had to buy a number of add-ons to an already expensive point motor. And the SEEP PM1s were just over £5 each. So I thought that would solve the problem. The other issue I had was that one of the points was right over the joint in the between the two boards. So for that one I've chosen a Pico surface side mounted motor. And while that's been a bit fiddly, it's generally worked well. It's with the SEEP PM1s that I've had the greatest of difficulty, and anyone who's on RM Web may well have seen the thread I posted on there when I was tearing my hair out trying to get them to work. Something I didn't appreciate at first was how accurately you needed to align the SEEP point motors. With other point motors apparently, such as the Pico PM10s, the alignment of the motor is not quite as critical, and that's partly because the design of the PM1 with the integrated switch. That meant that I had no end of issues trying to fit the point motors to the points. Plus the situation where, because the baseboard, which I'm generally really pleased with from scalemodelScenery.co.uk, was only 4mm thick, it meant it was difficult to mount point motors using screws, so I was trying to use glue. After doing a bit of research and so on, I discovered that there are a number of people who've done third-party things to try and assist you in mounting and aligning your SEEP point motors. And I've bought some of these alignments, and there's a link down in the description. And I've got no connection other than these have worked really well for me. And as you can see, there's a raised section with a circular hole with a slot cut in it, so that is where the actuating rod moves through, and that allows for accurate alignment. And these are then fitted underneath the point motor, and then you can then screw the point motor to the mount using splice screws into those holes. Ideally, this would have been done first off before laying the track, because you just need to drill a 10mm hole right underneath the point, and you can then mark off the alignment of the point on the surface and then transfer that information to the underside, and then align the mounting bracket appropriately. But because I'd already fixed down my track, I had to do everything from underneath. And that's where a lot of my problems came from. However, it was during the course of this that I came up against another issue. SEEP point motors work best with a capacitor discharge unit, which is basically a capacitor that's wired into the circuit between your switches and point motors, stores up the electricity and discharges it all in one go to give the point motors a good solid thump. One of the other advantages of a capacitor discharge unit is it stops electricity flowing to the solenoid motors and potentially burning them out if a switch is left in the wrong place, for instance. However, I had an issue. When I was young, I'd always wanted point motors with my train set, and so I'd always wanted to have some of the Hornby levers to control them, and I've always liked them because they kind of give a sort of signal box feel to the actions of sort of changing a point motor or changing a signal, etc. The problem I had was that these particular switches work in a way which mean that they can't be used with a capacitor discharge unit. So that meant I had to change over to a different switch. Luckily, Pico's PL26 switches are similar in that there's a sort of a lever that you can throw, and they would work with a capacitor discharge unit. At the same time as buying those, I bought a Pico CDU, which I thought would be designed to work well with the Pico switches. Unbeknownst to me, the Pico CDU is actually quite low powered, and I was finding that it was taking 10 seconds or more to recharge fully before I was able to throw a switch and change another point. Whereas certainly the videos that I'd seen is that having a CDU meant that you could throw several switches at once, and several in quick succession without any problems at all. So I had to change the CDU. And I looked around, and there were a number of suggestions of good CDUs, and I settled for one from a company called Hobby Tracks, based up here in Scotland. I'll put a link down in the description. And their CDU also allows for the operation by a separate power supply. And in order to make sure that it was getting as much power as possible, and the supply that I was giving it from the controller wasn't sort of restricted in any way, I got a separate power supply as well for it. And that combination has worked really, really well. I wish I'd chosen it from the start, because I've been really impressed with it. And you can see from the little LED light that's on it, which tells it when it's charged, that it recharges almost instantaneously. And I've managed to get the alignment correct with the points, and that's been a bit of a struggle, but they are all now aligned. So now I'm at that stage where I have a working layout with track down and point motors fitted, and I can now move on to the next stage. For the moment, I've just put a piece of track at the end of the layout, but I will be building a slightly more proper fiddle yard to go onto the end in due course. I don't know whether it will be a stick fiddle yard with just one track, or I have in mind to use a Y point so that I've got two tracks able to connect into the layout. This siding is going to be a end loading dock siding. The Loch Tay branch in later years had one of Perth's standard 4 MT tanks pulling a single brake coach of pre-grouping era. I think it was either a Thompson or Gresley suburban coach. And trains were usually mixed, i.e. they had passenger and freight. So usually just one coach and one van trains. And as you can see, that's going to fit quite nicely on the layout here. I'm going to work on a method of uncoupling, probably using ramps in between the track, but I'll cover that in a later video or in the next update. As you can see, there's very impressive, smooth, slow speed performance over the points. I'm going to disguise the surface mounted point motor with a little bit of scenery, greenery. You'll see how that goes on. This is the Bachmann standard 4 tank. I haven't renumbered it because I also use it on my other layout, a pottery. So I don't know if one side will be Exmouth junction engine and the other side will be a Perth engine. But we'll think about that. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Although the standard 4 MT tank is the only suitable rolling stock I have at the moment, I am planning on bringing it forward a few years and getting some green and blue diesels. And at the far end there's going to be a engine shed in low relief and a small coal yard here next to the engine shed in this siding. So please smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe and hit the set the notifications on so you can be alerted the next time there's an update on the micro layout.